Hello, everyone. Welcome to Revolution Gathering. This is actually take two. We were live today on YouTube, and our connection somehow got messed up, and it kept pausing. So we lost that. Well, we didn't lose the talk. We just ended halfway through because we couldn't really. It was messing the whole talk up. So we're going to go ahead and throw up some of those clips later because I was really feeling where we were going with that. So we're going to throw up some of those clips later as kind of bonus footage. But today we're going to finish the Galatians series. Gosh, one track mind. Today we're going to finish our Paul Tillich's "You Are Accepted" from the book. Paul Tillich, Shaking the Foundations. Such an amazing book. Highly recommend it. It's a collection of Paul Tillich's sermons. So we're going to share that. We're going to finish up the "You Are Accepted," which is in here. One of the things that, before we get into that, I was thinking about this week and ended up having a conversation. Well, just replying on a Instagram post about someone who was talking about the Apostle Paul, and I was like, the salvation we understand comes from the Apostle Paul, not Christianity. And it was one of these things where they kind of, a lot of progressives do this, is kind of like want to push Paul aside or ignore the Apostle Paul, and because of, Romans 1, or, they don't realize that the pastoral epistles aren't even Paul, that it's fake Paul, or other verses about the women speaking out and things like that. Parts in Corinthians that were actually added way after Paul's death. So, you've got that. But for me, I think it's it would be extremely dangerous to get rid of Paul, because for me, I had read the Gospels. I think where those are the only thing, Gospels and some of the Old Testament, some of the Proverbs and stuff as a kid. But I still thought God hated me. I still felt this like judgment, if you will, of Christianity. And when it wasn't until I read read the writings of Paul, that I really understood grace. It wasn't until I read Paul that we realized that he brings in the Gentiles. He starts to bring us into more inclusion and building on inclusion. And it's really an amazing foundation that Paul is building on and building for us. He really builds into that more and more people, and bringing divided people together. The concepts of, Corinthians 13, 4-7, just alone. The Galatians bringing divided groups together, reminding us that we're never too good to restore someone, that we should always be ready to give an answer, but do it in a gentle, loving, kind way. So I think anytime we try to get away from the Apostle Paul, we miss something beautiful, and we risk a graceless faith, a faith without grace, the faith without really understanding grace. So it took the Apostle Paul to explain grace to me, and then I got it. Before then, I felt kind of trapped. So that kind of ties in with the end of the "You Are Accepted" talk today, which we're just going to get into now. Paul Tillich. Paul Tillich was probably the greatest philosopher theologian of the 20th century. Very well respected. He was also kicked out of Germany by the Nazis, which is a pretty cool thing to have happen, I guess. Not really. If you're a German, he was he was in the First World War, and so when he was being kicked out of Germany, it was really tough for him. That was his home, and he moved to America and became an immigrant, and barely speak the language and had to learn the language. Became a great teacher, inspiration for Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Great man. So here's a writing by an immigrant that we got out of their own their own unfortunate circumstances, and someone who needed a safe place to go in America was that. So today's This is Paul Tillich talking about this, and this is a sermon he gives. Usually philosophers and theologians don't always give great sermons, and this guy just knocks them out of the park. This talk is based around Romans 5:20. We've done 2 parts before this, so you can go check those out if you haven't yet. Also, I recommend listening to Pete Rollins read this, which is on our YouTube channel. Wherever you listen to our podcast, it's available there. And it's You Are Accepted, read by Paul. Not read by Paul Tillich, but by Paul Tillich and read by Peter Rollins. But the verse he's talking about is in Romans 5:20, where it says, the law entered and the offense might abound, but where sin abounds, grace did much more abound. So let's get into this and see where we can go. Lots of fun reading from me. When sin abounded, grace did much more abound, says Paul in the same letter in which he describes the unimaginable power of separation and self-destruction within society and the individual soul. He does not say these words because his sentimental interests demand a happy ending for everything tragic. He says them because he describes the most overwhelming and determining experience in his life. In the picture of Jesus as Christ, which appeared to him at the moment of his greatest separation from other men, from himself, and from God, he found himself accepted in spite of his being rejected. And we've all heard this done in different ways. The book of Acts gives 3 different, tells the story 3 different ways. I don't think the book of Acts is the most reliable source for the life of Paul, but it's interesting and it's worth reading. But it gives this the road to Damascus story 3 different ways, 3 different times, probably on purpose. But it's interesting. But the idea is that Paul was condemning Christians. Now, scholarship says that some of the scholars agree that it probably wasn't violently, that he wouldn't have had that type of ability to do that, to be part of the government, but that he was still challenging them, still trying to get rid of Christianity through his words and things like that. And could you imagine being in the midst of that? It's much like Matthew in the mix of tax collecting when Jesus calls him out and says, "Come be my disciple." It's that moment where he just realizes that grace is his. It says he was able to accept himself to be reconciled to others. The moment in which grace struck him and overwhelmed him, he was reunited with that which he belonged, from that which he was estranged in utter strangeness. I love that. Let's read that one more time. And from which he was estranged in utter strangeness. You ever feel estranged in utter strangeness? I know I do sometimes. Do we know what it means to be struck by grace? And I'm going to answer that question before Tillich tells us about it. For me, I do. Grace transformed my whole life. Like I said before, it was the work of St. Paul that really shifted my whole system, my whole train of thought, that allowed me to kind of go back into ministry. Probably not the place I wanted to be. I'd already spent a year starting Revolution, but in my head, I felt like something was wrong with me. I felt like I could never follow Christ. Like I never thought I was good enough. I never thought I was worthy. I never felt accepted. I just really thought there's something wrong here until I read Paul. And that moment where grace really struck me, and I had looked back at my whole life, because, I grew up thinking, I wrote this down. I grew up and I thought all the angry, judgmental Christians were the real Christians. Everything that my parents went through, all the stuff I heard growing up about how God's going to get you and, never takes his eyes off you and I'm going to punish you. I completely had accepted that as God. And when I started to read the Apostle Paul, I was shocked that I had really been making Christ's death in vain, that I had really been trying to live a life of good works. But see, that's often what's sold to us. That's often what's given to us in the evangelical church, is this idea that grace is this kind of just very temporary thing that is for salvation. And I guess I'm saying grace is not just for salvation anymore. And so you get this idea that like grace is something that doesn't really work. We'll get into that a little bit further. Because I also remember thinking a lot of the loving, more compassionate Christians were just justifying their own sin, because you grow up in a thing where there's like a million sins, different levels of sins, as it felt like. And there's nothing you can do about it. So I thought, well, some of these Christians who talk about forgiveness and love and grace, they must be justifying their own sin. They want to have their cake and eat it too. And boy, was I wrong. And I'm grateful that I was wrong. So again, Tillich says here, do we know what it means to be struck by grace? So I want you to open your ears, beep, beep. Turn them on, click, click, start listening. Open your heart. Let all the smoke and bats and darkness out for a few minutes. Because we really want to get this. We really want to get grace here. We really want to hear what Tillich has to say. I think it's vital. I think we've got to remember like how important Paul Tillich is in this. As such an amazing thinker, and that even he's impressed and blown away by the concept of grace. So do we know what it means to be struck by grace? Listen to this. It does not mean that we suddenly believe that God exists. Or that Jesus is the Savior. Or that the Bible contains truth. I think for so many Christians, and I think even if a lot of folks heard this now, they would be like, oh, that's not true. Oh, that's dangerous theology. Oh, that's dangerous road to take, But for me, this is such a truth moment. This is why Revolution talks about grace. This is why grace has changed my life, is because it's not about knowing more, understanding more, believing more. It's literally about acceptance. So let's get into this even deeper. It does not mean that we suddenly believe that God exists, or that Jesus is the Savior, or that the Bible contains truth. To believe something is almost contrary to the meaning of grace. Furthermore, grace does not mean simply that we are making progress in our moral self-control, in our fight against special faults, and in our relationships to people and to society. Moral progress may be a fruit of grace, but it is not grace itself. And it can even prevent us from receiving grace. Now, do you hear that again? Let's try that one more time. Moral progress may be a fruit of grace, but it is not grace itself. And I grew up where moral progress was the whole point of faith. And I think a lot of us still have that. On the right, it's more about what you don't do and what you've given up. And then on the left, it's more about what you do and what you care about and what you think about. There's all these different expectations on each side of the aisle, if you will. But Tillich really points it out well here. Because when he says moral progress may be a fruit of grace, which I believe it is, but it is not grace itself, and even prevents us from receiving grace. And why is that? Because we try to work. We try to do it. You end up like me for so many years where you think you can earn your salvation, where you have to do it. It's in your hands. that you're not accepted and that you have to do something to be proven worthy of love. And that's not just true. I mean, when you really realize this, you understand why folks like myself speak out against what's happening with Gaza, what's happening with our immigrant brothers and sisters. I mean, you have no other choice when you really understand grace and you really understand acceptance and you really understand that grace is all people and that grace has no asterisk and that it's anarchy for those who do have asterisks. You're only really left with wanting to love others more and to see others experience the acceptance that you yourself have. It's strange that way. You don't have to do that, but it just seems to naturally happen. But so it can even prevent us from receiving grace. For there is too often graceless acceptance of Christian doctrine and a graceless battle against the structures of evil and our personalities. You know, this idea that we've got to take care of it all, we've got to make it happen. We got to not do these things, or we got to do certain things. And so it says, for there's too often a graceless acceptance of a Christian doctrine and a graceless battle against the structures of evil in our personalities. We see this so much in the church, so much in Christianity, so much on Facebook, man. You go on to Facebook, it's just like a wild, you post stuff up there, and it's wild what some people say in the name of God. Such a graceless relation to God may lead us by necessity. Now, I want you to hear this because I think it's very vital. Such a graceless relation to God may lead us to a necessity either to be arrogance or to despair. And so many of us, I think, have left the church because of arrogance, because of this judgmental arrogance. Oh, I'm the man of God, do not question the anointed, all this like really weird power stuff, or like, we're going to run our church like IBM and it's going to be a business, and you get all this weird stuff and you get this arrogance of these preachers and these teachers. But the problem is that what they've done is they've taken a graceless acceptance of Christianity. They've left grace out of it. So you can't blame them, because really you can blame them, I guess. Yeah, you can. But the only other real option for them is despair. And to be honest with you, probably have some despair as well. But what happens is we get this despair that just drives us away, or that drives us cynical, or that we just don't even believe what we're talking about, or we don't believe it's for us, and makes us completely cynical like I was. And sometimes still feel that cynicism, to be honest with you. It's very hard for me to spend time with more than one or two Christians. It's very hard for me to want to go into a church and be around religious people. Like, I don't even know, like, I know I'm a pastor, but I don't feel like I fit into that world at all. Because I've tried to feel like I live life on life's terms. I live a life that also embraces doubt as part of faith. I live a life of inclusion, living life on life's terms. I don't like all the bells and whistles and all the, reading the stuff and dressing up and things like that. Nothing against that for those who do it, but it's just never been for me, and nothing that I've always ever really been comfortable with. So we end up in having this graceless battle, and it leads us to this necessity of either arrogance or despair. And we see a lot of people leaving the church today because I think there's a despair of what Christianity is and what it's become and what it looks like. Tillich goes on to say here, it would be better to refuse God and the Christ and the Bible than to accept them without grace. For if we accept without grace, we do so in a state of separation, and can only succeed in deepening the separation. So we do so in a state of separation. We can only succeed in a deepening of separation. And one of the big things about that for me is I know people who left the church and said, I don't believe in Christianity anymore, and actually became better people. Became kinder people, became more loving people. I even had one friend who I said, hey, this was like when I was a pastor in Atlanta, height of my, work. and I guess success and all that stuff. But whenever I would get around this guy, I would feel like I wasn't Christian enough, like I wasn't following Jesus enough, that there was something wrong with me, that I was somehow a compromiser, and I felt under judgment. And so years ago, he gave up following Christ, or gave up going to church, and he went the other way, like a lot of people do. They go, I'm going to go crazy. That's all bullshit. But I told him once, I said, you're a lot nicer. I said, I used to feel so judged by you. I said, I never felt like I added up. And they were like, yeah, I was really, really judgmental when I was there in that part of my life. And I look at something like that and go like, well, they just had this graceless Christianity. They just had a faith without grace. And, really the options for that person is either to jump into some sort of arrogance where you judge everyone and probably secretly judge yourself, become like a Mark Driscoll type, or you just lose hope. And I think the actual, like, the conclusion that really makes sense for any of those people, even those judgmental people, is eventually being hopeless. And you realize that those things haven't worked and don't happen and don't create things past, don't produce the fruits of the Spirit, so on and so forth. But I think it's crazy that people say it'd be better to refuse God and Christ and the Bible than to accept them without grace. And I believe that because I've seen it firsthand what it does to people, and I think we see it all the time in the church. For if we accept without grace, we do it so in a state of separation and can only succeed in deepening the separation. We cannot transform our lives unless we allow them to be transformed by that stroke of grace. It happens, or it does not happen. And it certainly does not happen if we try to force it upon ourselves, just as it shall not happen so long as we think in our self-compliancy that we have no need of it. And so often for me, I thought the grace there was no need for it, or that it was just a nice song, or it was really just kind of a bait and switch thing where you went. I grew up with Assemblies of God, so there were always altar calls, every head bowed, every eye closed, raise your hand if you want Jesus. I see that hand, I see that hand, I see that hand, and then all of a sudden they tell you have to walk up front down to the altar, and that if you don't walk down to the altar, you're denying God. I mean, it gets like real serious real fast. Like if you don't, he'll deny you. If you deny him, so you need to walk on down, and you're going like, oh my gosh. All right, now I'm already having to like be a martyr for Jesus, for my faith that I just got 2 seconds ago. And in the Assemblies of God, you could lose your faith. So it was like constantly like getting saved over and over again, because every time you sinned, you thought, you lost your salvation, because it was like your salvation was in like sand through your fingers, almost like water, impossible to grasp. And in a way it was, it was this bait and switch. That was what was grace was for. It's like, it's this free gift. It's like a car. Here's your free car. I've got it. And I'm going to give it to you. Do you receive this car? Do you accept a car? I know Lutherans like receive grace, and then, other people like accept grace, and it's all has to do with actions. But either way, it's receive or accept these keys, and you go, oh, take them. And that's great. Now, all you have to do is fill it up with gas when it goes empty, pay the monthly car bill, pay the insurance, and you should probably get oil changes every 3 months. And you go, wait, I thought this was free. It is, buddy. I just gave it to you. Now it's yours. Now it's your responsibility. It's all of a sudden dives into, you've got to be moral. And it's almost to the point where so much time in Christianity boils down to like morality right off the bat. Like, okay, this is what you do, this is what you don't do. You need to meet with these people. They're going to tell you how to do it and what not to do. And it's like you joined like some sort of weird moral group of saying like, now we're going to tell you how to do all the morals. We're going to tell you how to think. We're going to tell you probably you should think about this way. Maybe you should only vote on one issue. You should do this. And so it starts to happen where you get all these strange, it just really, grace goes out the door. What I loved about the 12-step program is you come in and if you mess up, you come back in, and you pick up another white chip, And the church never felt that way. It felt like, okay, now you've got to go into ministry. Now you got to win other people to Jesus. It seemed like a numbers game, or a game based on, we got to make Daddy happy, So make sure you show up to church and make sure you worship, you participate in praise and worship, and try to start another ministry and tell, And so it all became about works and deeds. And so I'm more of a human being than a human doing in a lot of ways. And I think for me, that's why it just kind of drove me to despair. So again, he says, we cannot transform our lives unless we allow them to be transformed by that stroke of grace. It happens or it does not happen. And it does not happen if we try to force it upon ourselves, just as it shall not happen as long as we think in our self-compliancy that we have no need of it. That's one of the struggles I've had with a lot of folks, my Calvinist, especially neo-Calvinist brothers and sisters. They talk a lot about grace, but then they talk a lot about predestination, and then it just seems like, well, I didn't really need grace. I need grace because I'm a filthy, horrible sinner, but I've been chosen by God. Unlike the unchosen, I have been chosen. And so grace all of a sudden just becomes this little small thing where they give a lot of lip service to. But it's only for a particular group of people. It's only for the chosen people. And, there's a bunch of people that don't get it. And it comes through their work. It comes through their work because you see the arrogance. Well, Paul said, and they get really, I can understand why people want to get rid of Paul sometimes with the way that a lot of my neo-Calvinist brothers and sisters use it, or Southern Baptists use him. Honestly, I don't think I think it's very destructive. And so, but grace becomes almost weaponized, and it's not even a weapon. It's just like this limp, castrated thing that we just, it's something we talk about, but it's only for the elect, So then that gets really weird, and we make it all about salvation. But here, Paul Tillich is saying some things that are very different than that. So I think a lot of folks who get into church act as if they don't need grace. And I didn't know I needed grace because I thought I needed to be better. I needed to do more. Grace strikes us when we are in great pain. Yeah, it's true. And restlessness. It strikes us when we walk through the dark valley of meaningless and empty life. It strikes us when we feel the separation is deeper than usual because we have violated another life, a life which we loved or from which we were estranged. It strikes us when we are in disgust of our own being, our indifference, our weakness, our hostility, and our lack of direction and composure have become intolerable to us. I think there's a lot there. This idea that when we have violated another life, when we become so cruel to others, when we've ignored others' suffering. It also says that life when we loved, when we feel our separation is deeper than usual because we have violated another life, a life which we have loved or from which we were estranged. And when I stepped into Christianity, I remember a lot of the things that people would say early on was like, well, you got to stop hanging out with those people. You got to stop doing that. It became this really like, you can't love the people you used to love, and that estrangement alone felt empty and felt wrong in every sense of my body. People who loved me more than anybody ever did in the church were folks outside the church. And to say, oh, you need to separate from yourself from them. They could lead you down the wrong road, So grace was just this useless, no power at all, So what happens if I did go down the wrong road? Would I still be accepted and loved? Not in their way of thinking. God forbid if I would have become gay or anything like that, because all these things they kept saying, this is what separates you from God, rather than separation itself. So they had all these moralistic ways of thinking. At the same time, there's a lot of us who look at people like that and deny grace to them as well. We deny grace to the judgmental. We deny grace to the Pharisees as well. And I think that's a huge mistake, because I think we've got to speak grace loudly, preach grace, if you will, talk about grace constantly, because we want to see reunion happen. We want to see restoration happen. When Paul in the book of Galatians says, if you think you're too good to restore someone, you're only fooling yourself. And literally in that moment, he is talking about the Judaizers, these legalistic group of Christians who've come in and said, oh, you can't be Christian if if you don't go through these steps. He's literally saying these people need to be restored. So when I see people doing deconstruction and things like that, and they're like, yeah, those guys are all a bunch of bastards, and they're all, and it's like, okay, they might be bastards or acting like bastards, but it is our job to help them understand grace. It's our job to help them realize that they got misinformation and that it's called good news for a reason. That's what a reformation is all about. A reformation isn't about, well, let's condemn all these people, let's tear all these people apart. It's saying, let's restore one another. Let's speak of grace. Let them see the true power of grace, and what they've been ignoring all the years, and the power of that they don't have to believe anymore, that they don't have to think anymore, that they don't have to believe that Jesus is the Savior anymore. That there's not all these ifs, ands, and buts, but that they are accepted by that which is greater than themselves. And there's so much fruit to that. But I can't tell you particularly, because I think it's different for everybody. But the fact that we miss out on that, and that when we get grace for ourselves and we get that acceptance, we end up thinking it's only for a certain group of people again. And really the people who really need it are these legalistic, angry people, because their fruit of their lives has led to more and more and more deeper separation with themselves and with others and with people who follow them. And if we really do care about people, then it's vital that we continue to bring that grace and spread that message, even within our evangelical, legalistic brothers and sisters, or whatever you want to call them. That's why I talk about having tough conversations. People are always like, oh, a bunch of kumbaya bullshit. And I'm like, man, this is not kumbaya stuff at all. I had someone tell me today, because of standing up for hungry children, that I was a mouthpiece of Hamas. It's ridiculous. It's sad how we lose touch with our humanity. Anyhow, it strikes us when our disgust for our own being, our indifference, our weakness, our hostility. In 12-step program, they talk about being sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I hope that legalistic religious people, and I hope people who are judgmental, get sick and tired of being judgmental and legalistic and all that stuff. It's so funny. I was watching Mark Maron's new stand-up special. I love Mark Maron. I was on Mark Maron's show once. I've always been a fan of Mark's. And, he starts out with really nailing the conservatives and the Republicans and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden he goes into, but liberals, man, we are such killjoys. We come into something and someone says something and we start to police their words and police their thought. We just zap out any of the life out of the room. You should really watch it. It's a good, he does a lot of good there. The bit at the end is really hilarious. It's all hilarious, but there's some stuff that's just knock you down hilarious. So we don't realize, even as progressives, when we can destroy joy as well. It's I always think it's funny, progressives are look, they're burning books, and then you see the progressives are I just want to remove this word and that word from the book so it's not offensive. Both folks want to do some sort of censorship, and they don't even see it. It's we just can't learn to live life on life's terms. And I think self-acceptance, real self-acceptance, helps us do that for others, and does realize we don't have to be in control of everything. I think when we walk around trying to control everything and police everything, that is another way of diving deeper into separation from ourselves and definitely from others. We're not doing ourselves any favors. And I think that's what we have to remember for some of those folks who've made the switch into more of a progressive way of thinking in Christianity, is double check that you're not like a killjoy and you're just being just as judgmental as the other people. You're just doing it in the name of another idea. Just now you're a progressive killjoy. Now you're a progressive judgmental bastard. We need to do things that reunite us. Grace is reunion, and that means even reunion with our enemies. Why did Paul say love your enemies? Why did Jesus say love your enemies? Do good to those who persecute you. Pray for those who persecute you. Because grace is reunion. If you think you're too good to restore someone, you're only fooling yourself. You're really a nobody. Grace is reunion. When Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me? After that, he goes, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. I think if that was kind of a verse and a saying that we're able to hold in our hearts a little bit more, we might have a little more grace towards those who offend us and hurt others, with the hope that maybe we can help them not be so hurtful. I know it's a lot of work, but like I've said before, it's progress, not perfection. It strikes us when our disgust for our own being, our own indifference, our weakness, our hostility, and our lack of direction and composure have become intolerable to us. It strikes us when year after year the longed for perfection of life does not appear, when the old compulsions reign within us that we have for decades, when despair destroys all joy and courage. I think that's happening to a lot of us just right now in the world. The president every day just throwing so much out at us, and then seeing so many people suffering right now, it's very easy to feel destroyed, and the destroying of all joy and courage. Sometimes at the moment a light breaks into our darkness, and it is as though a voice were saying, you are accepted. You are accepted by that which is greater than you, in a name which you do not know. Do not ask for the name, and perhaps you will find it later. Do not try to do anything now. Perhaps later you will do much. Do not seek for anything. Do not perform anything. Do not intend anything. Simply accept the fact that you are accepted. Had I heard that on a Sunday night service, had I heard that growing up, I would have had a different life. This moment of just being like, rest within this acceptance and rest within this love. Really trusting the fruits of the Spirit. But instead it became like, and here's the rule book, and here's what you got to do. We need to see it at least 3 times a week. That type of thing is not Christianity. It's an American tradition of faith, but it's not actual following Christ. And it has very little to do with grace or following Jesus. If that happens to us, we experience grace. After such an experience, we may not be better than before, and we may not believe more than before, but everything is transformed. In that moment, grace conquers sin, and reconciliation bridges the gulf of estrangement. And nothing is demanded of the experience. No religious or moral or intellectual predisposition, nothing but acceptance. So here's this idea that nothing but accepting you are accepted is accepting that's it. And how far is this from, it's not very often they're going to have a theologian and a philosopher and a very brilliant mind of the 20th century give you a clue on faith. And I found that a lot of really amazing philosophers really see Christianity in such a clear way, and in because they don't have all that baggage and all those traditions and all that weird, Americana and economics and all that stuff built into it, all the politics mixed with it that kind of screw it up. That was the beginning of the end of Christianity, really was the first 300 years when Constantine came in and was like, whoa, we're going to go to war in the name of Jesus, In the light of grace, we perceive the power of grace in our relationship to others and to ourselves. We experience the grace of being able to look frankly into the eyes of another, the miraculous grace. Now listen, this is about love for others. Grace and being able to look frankly into the eyes of another, the miraculous grace of reunion, of life with life. And God, how badly do we need that right now? Not only do I talk to people every day who are justifying the killing and mistreatment of our brothers and sisters all over the world. They can't even see it in my eyes. They can't even see it within a conversation with myself. They've missed the humanity. And for me, I'm always trying to see the humanity there. So we are able to look into others in the miraculous grace of reunion of life with life. We experience the grace of understanding each other's words. We understand not merely this literal meaning of the words, but also that which lies behind them. So we are able to see the fear. We're able to see the need to be arrogant or the need to be hopeless. We're able to see those things in those words. But also that which lies behind them, even when they are harsh or angry. We're still able to see their humanity when we accept grace, when we accept ourselves as accepted, when we experience this reunion. So this is what's really powerful. I mean, I feel like this could be like the Revolution Manifesto. We experience the grace of being able to accept the life of another, even if it is hostile and harmful to us. Listen to that. So many people are like, well, I can't accept if they don't recognize me. I can't accept if they're hostile towards me. But look what Tillich is telling us. This is a man who was kicked out of Germany by the Nazis, who was a German who loved his own country and loved us and was made an outcast by them. Forced to come to America, forced to learn a language, forced to redo his whole life and be separated from the people he loves. We experience the grace of being able to accept the life of another, even if it is hostile and harmful to us. For through grace we know that it belongs to the same ground of which belongs that we belong and by which we have been accepted. I mean, you see a very strong connection to Dr. King here and how he was able to, live in that every day and not see enemies as the people to be defeated, but to see them set free from the misinformation. Because to see that we are connected by the same ground of being, the same air, the same things we breathe. And we've lost that today. I see so many people saying so many horrible things now. And it's we've lost that ground of being that connects us all together. We know that we belong to the same ground to which we belong and by which we have been accepted. We experience the grace which is able to overcome the tragic separation of the sexes. Now you got to remember, imagine it's like 1948, 49, 50, it's probably 50, 51. And you're sitting in, you're sitting in a chapel, and you're hearing this sermon. I mean, this is like, 70 years ago, and in America, and you're hearing someone say the separation of this will get rid of the separation of the sexes. This will help you love your enemies. This is mind-boggling stuff, and this isn't stuff that was written today, but it's so needed today because we see where that separation has got us over these past 70 years since the sermon was written, and that we're still within that horrific separation that continues to go deeper and deeper. We experience the grace which is able to overcome the tragic separation of the sexes, of the generations, which, gosh, okay, boomer, all that crap. I'm Generation X, so... The nations, hear that, look at the wars we're seeing today. Of the races, nations and races, think about how we're treating our immigrant brothers and sisters so horrifically, and what the horrible things that ICE is doing to them, and it's just further separation. It's sin. It is sin. I see quite a few Christians support this and vote for this and believe in this. But for me, that separation is sin. They've missed the concept of grace. They've missed the depths of grace. I think we also miss grace, when it's only goes one way. So again, it says, we experience the grace by which we're able to overcome the tragic separations of the sexes, of the generations, of the nations, of the races, and even the utter strangeness between man and nature. Sometimes grace appears in all this separation to reunite us with those whom we belong, for life belongs to life. Could you imagine if the church really believed that life belongs to life, and that what was important in helping people realize that they are accepted and that they are loved and that there's nothing else required to it, how revolutionary, how mind-boggling the faith of Christianity would be. And what I like about listening to some of these philosophers' podcasts, even a lot of them have nothing to do with Christianity, most of them, to be honest with you. But the interesting thing is this, is that they say that faith has been so hijacked. It's because otherwise they would be loving everybody. There would be this type of thing happening. They would be like socialists. They would do all this stuff. And he's like, but no, somehow it's been hijacked by this like weird American closed-minded nationalist way of thinking. But imagine, and that's the thing too, because I'm not just bashing a conservative type of Christianity, also on the left of type of Christianity, because they don't see that the life of those conservatives belong to life either, that they don't realize that we all belong to one another, that we are interconnected, that is the importance part of life, is that we are all called together. And that's why I think John Hume got it so well, is he's like diversity, unity through diversity, because diversity is always going to be a part of life. Difference is just life itself, but we're all called to find unity and be included in that and come together. And that's the only way we make real differences. So it's very easy to be judgmental. It's very easy to point fingers. It's very easy to be cynical, because life can make you cynical. But then when you realize that no one gets what they want, I think as Conan O'Brien said at the end of the Tonight Show, we hopefully we can make less room for cynicism. Obviously, you don't have to do that for grace, but I think for those of us who want to carry it on and spread grace, is that cynicism is not going to be the way that we help others realize that they truly are accepted with no ifs, ands, and bounds. It's almost like we've got to go back and say, you were lied to. You were sold, you were sold. They were told you they were giving you a free car, and you were actually sold a new car. You had to pay the price. And you're not the one who's supposed to pay the price. You are accepted as you are. Not as you should be, but just as you are, you can sit within that. For life belongs to life. In the light of this grace, we perceive the power of grace in our relationship to ourselves, folks. We're always talking about self-care and things like that. And it's right. Like accepting oneself, accepting your flaws, that is being we've got to see the relation within acceptance of ourselves too. And that's the problem why so many of these people are so angry and so hurt, is because they really don't ever truly understand grace. They really truly don't ever really accept that they are accepted. I remember a pastor one time writing something about my mother in this book, saying my mom wrote this book about I gotta be me, and he's like, that's not dying to your flesh, that's not really God. And this was like a progressive guy, and for me, her saying I gotta be me was her saying, I have experienced the grace and perceived the power of grace in our relationship to herself. She experienced grace for herself. We experience in a moment which accepts ourselves because we feel that we have been accepted by that which is greater than we. Such a powerful thing. Because often when we're fighting people, we're showing cruelty towards other people, it's usually always cruelty towards ourselves. It's usually some sort of projection. If only more such moments were given to us. For if such moments that make us love our life, that make us accept ourselves, not in our goodness, hear that, not in our goodness and self-compliancy, but in our certainty, in ourselves or in our goodness or in self-compliancy, but in our certainty of the eternal meaning of our life. We cannot force ourselves to accept ourselves. We cannot compel anyone to accept themselves. But sometimes it happens that we receive the power to say yes to ourselves. The peace enters into us and marks us whole. That self-hate and self-contempt disappear, and that our self is reunited with itself. Then we can say that grace has come upon us. And when this grace comes upon you, it's a beautiful thing. And it gets really hard not to want other people to experience that same thing. Sin and grace are strange words, but they are not strange things. We find them whenever we look into ourselves with searching eyes and longing hearts. They determine our life. They abound with us in all of life. May grace more abound within us. You are accepted, Paul Tillich. I hope that hit you guys like it's hit me, and I hope you'll go check it out. You can Google it, and it'll be one of the first things that comes on. You can read it there, or you can listen to, like I said, Peter Rollins read it on our Revolution channel or any of the places you can hear our podcast. You know, just search out Peter Rollins. You are accepted. It should come up. So, yeah, that's why Revolution exists. That's why we're here, is to reunion and to really fight against the separation that continues to try to happen in this world. When you start looking at politics that separate us, and even identity politics that do to separate us stuff, that's where you see like, oh, okay, here's the sin. This is the stuff that keeps us fighting, keeps us arguing, keeps us, steals our empathy and love and compassion for those who are less than, those who are going through horrificness that we can just ignore it and go through our day as though no one's starving to death or no one's being grabbed off the street and thrown into cages. It really changes things. And I think grace is our only hope, to be honest with you. And I think Dr. King understood that, and obviously the Apostle Paul understood that, and Paul Tillich also himself got it, and I think I've grasped it pretty well myself, to the point where I can talk about nothing more than that grace. So thanks for joining us today. If you like what you're seeing, if you love Revolution's work, we could really use your support financially, and you can go to revolutionchurch.com, and we have PayPal and Venmo, and you can donate on there. Full transparency, that's how it helps me pay my bills. It also pays the bills for us being online and for all the stuff we have, and for the folks who handle our finances for us, because we want to make sure everything's done above the board. But also, this is August, and my son's birthday is on the 25th, so I really would love to get a full paycheck so I can get something fun for my son's birthday. Just, there you go. That's just me being as transparent as possible. I'm doing other work and working other jobs as well, but I would really love to get a full paycheck, so pay the rent and get a fun birthday gift for my son. That would be great and very helpful this month. So that's where we're at, and we want to continue this work and continue to spread this message. And I will continue to, I feel compelled to do this work. It's really tough to do it, but you do it by any means necessary. At a certain point, is you just feel so compelled to talk about grace and self-acceptance and helping people accept themselves and find this meaning and share this with others and see people change and have hope even in those who are hostile towards you. To me, has been a real big fruit of grace that's happened over, almost 30 years. It's taken time. But, the first few years I really struggled with loving my enemies, but now I have hope for my enemies. I don't love the things they do. I don't love the things they say by any means. I don't like the things they do, and I don't like the things they say. But I can love them and see them as humans who share the same ground of being as I do, and that we are connected. Whether you like it or not, what is the band National? The National used to have a song, "God loves everybody." And one of the lyrics in the song, I think it's called "Graceless." God loves everybody. Don't remind me. So, yeah, right. But there we are. So thank you all for your consideration, for your support. Thanks for listening. Get radical. Let's practice this. Let's see what we can do with this grace stuff. And love each other. Share this on your Instagrams and your Twitters. And I'm not on X anymore, but you can share it on your X and share it with people. Let people know what we're doing, what's going on. We want to continue to grow Revolution, because we want desperately so to get this message out that you are accepted, period. Bye-bye.